It's hard to know where to start. I am one of you. I worked in hydropower in the early 80s. I started in 1983 doing small hydro projects in New England, in Maine and New England. Did biomass, did a major biomass project in Maine. Then worked in energy conservation, started my own company and developed large-scale energy conservation projects around Maine at hospitals and paper mills and schools and colleges. Then went crazy and ran for governor, and I always considered it a kind of 8-year weird executive loan program to the public sector, and then left as governor with no intention of going back into business, taught and did a variety of other things, and then got into the wind power business and worked on commercial onshore wind power. But then sometime during this period, I started to realize the potential of the ocean. And made a speech at Bowdoin College. Chris, I don't remember when it was probably 7 or 8 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, talking about the potential in the Gulf of Maine. And one way to think of it is that I thought of starting my remarks by having a mock press release saying that scientists have discovered a gigantic pool of oil and natural gas under Maine's granite, sufficient to power all of New England indefinitely. I didn't think I could fool you very long on that, but that's the Gulf of Maine. The wind power, a wind power project in the Gulf of Maine that would take about 1% of the land area. I used to say it was the size of 4 porta potties at the corner of the end zone at Gillette Stadium, the Patriots. But that size of project could provide all the energy necessary for New England indefinitely. Cars, I'm talking about all the energy, not electricity, but automobiles, transportation, heat, the whole deal. The potential is unbelievable. There are really 2 barriers. And I'm sure, you know, this is the ultimate in preaching to the choir. You know what they are. One is financial and the other is regulatory. The financial ultimately will probably take care of itself in 2 ways. One is through the development of projects which will, in effect, as a practical matter, bring the price down. Because right now, what Chris is doing and did in Maine is hand build a project specifically for this one site. If you built a automobile today by hand with all the pieces, it would cost probably $1 million. Instead, it costs $20,000, and that's because of mass production and learning curve and efficiencies in manufacturing and those kinds of things. In effect, the projects that you all are working on now are those hand-built Ford cars. And so there's going to be I believe, a steep decline in the cost of the projects you develop. Ultimately, there will likely be an increase in the cost of fossil fuel, in the price of fossil fuel. Now, right now, the renewable industry in the U.S. is driven largely by the price of natural gas. And the price of natural gas is so low, it makes it difficult. Again, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know. It makes it very difficult for any technology. You could come up with a technology to make electricity out of dirt, and you probably couldn't make it work because the price of natural gas is at, I suspect, adjusted for inflation, an all-time low. But to give you an idea of what the sort of market price is of natural gas is that in the U.S. it's now about $2.50, $3, and in China it's 17. Markets will tend to find some kind of equilibrium, and that's certainly going to be an issue. But eventually, because it's a finite resource, natural gas and oil the prices are going to come up. The prices of renewables are going to come down. And there's going to be some place in the middle where these projects will work not only technically but economically. Now, there's not much I or anybody else in this room can do about that. Those are market forces beyond any of our control, and that's going to happen over time. The thing that I hope I can do something about is the regulatory challenge, and that's a serious issue. And Chris can talk to you about it. And I was at the dedication last summer. I took a motorcycle trip through Maine, which is a great way to see any state except on a rainy day. And the day we left your celebration, it rained like hell. Driving to Bangor, if you see guys on motorcycles, they look like they're grinning. They're not. If it's raining, they're gritting their teeth and hoping they don't catch any bugs. But anyway, we were there, and as I recall, there was a person from FERC, and she basically said, if it hadn't been, I think it was an intern or somebody in her office who had taken this project under their wing, that it wouldn't have happened. And they were FERC was willing to treat the project for what it was, which is a pilot project, a project from which we can learn, and give it a regulatory break, if you will, that enabled the project to go forward. Now, is it okay to say anything about the environmental study, or do we say that? We can say that later. Okay, well, there's a study that's being announced today based upon the experience of operation over the past year that essentially says the project has little or no impact on the environment. Now, if they had been required to prove the negative in advance of the installation of the project, of which there wasn't one in the world, it would have been practically impossible. How do you prove that a turbine in the tides isn't going to affect the environment and the fish until you do it? It would have been forever. It would have been the Consultants Relief Act of 2009. But it was a regulatory agency that was willing to listen and say, we're going to look at this as a pilot project. We're going to see how it works. We're going to learn what the impacts are, and then it'll give us a baseline upon which to judge other similar kinds of projects. I am very worried about the regulatory roadblocks to these kinds of projects. We now have approved in Maine, not approved by the federal agencies, but approved by our PUC, a 12 megawatt floating wind turbine project. It's the first in the US, just offshore. I think it's about 10 or 12 miles offshore in deep water. And this is an enormously important project for America and for Maine. Because as you all know, if we can figure out how to do floating wind turbines in an economic way, the energy potential off our shores is just absolutely gigantic. It's almost unlimited. But it has to be a new technology, because these aren't the old, the turbines like you see in Denmark that are planted in the water, in 50 feet of water. These are in 400 or 500 feet of water, so they have to be floated in some way. Statoil of Norway has pursued this project, but ultimately it's going to have to be approved by, and I'm sure I'm going to leave some out, but it's going to have FERC, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, NIMFS, some part of NOAA, probably the Coast Guard, maybe the U.S. Navy, and probably several other agencies that I haven't thought of. And if we don't find a way to coordinate the activities of those agencies and have them talk to each other and work together and have a lead agency with a time certain so that we don't have an endless seriatim process, this will never happen. This will never happen.